Hello, it's Rafael Gutierrez, and today I did an experiment which I want to show you. I used a rib just to show you how certain cuts may work, but in reality, it may not be as bad as people think it is. And it has to do with a lot of things that I've seen people talk about, how people get cut. Now, for me to do this, I ended up using what's called the scientific method. And the scientific method is something anyone can use. And the more knowledge you have of different um, natural sciences, the more the easier it is to work because you can use what you know to fill in the gaps. Ideally, though, at first, you don't even want to fill in the gaps. So, mostly it's martial artists. We'll ask a question: and as I do Okinawan karate, I will ask, does Okinawan karate increase life expectancy? Now, that's one thing that a lot of people do. There's a book that suggests not. And interestingly, the person who didn't use Okinawan karateka. He used variation of martial artists. Now, as a someone who wants to do their own research, you would say, okay, does Okinawan karate increase life expectancy? So what you would want to do is you'd want to take 100 people who were martial artists and 100 people who weren't, and look at their life expectancies. Now, there's always going to be different things, and you can actually get sampling errors. But let's assume that we go in and we go to Okinawa and we find 100 people who trained in karate at some point in their life, and some people who didn't. And we follow them, and we start seeing what their life expectancy is. And one of the things a lot of researchers do is they'll drop people out who don't fit the parameters. For instance, if martial arts increases life expectancy, but people are dying because of a battle, you have to get rid of those people who died because of injuries outside of the normal. And you do the same thing on the other side. So you end up getting two populations which are dying of natural causes, and that's it. Now, what we end up what we can end up doing is we can also do this another way. If we see evidence that, okay, look, we're seeing that martial artists are living longer, the principal when they did the blue zone, the person that they use for blue zone studies, you've heard me talk about them. They're the places where people live longer, happier, healthier lives. And the person that they used for the model of how men should age was a guy who was in martial arts, Okinawan karateka. And so as you start seeing this, you can end up saying, okay, well, it looks like there's a possibility here. But then we actually wouldn't want to just stick to that. We then would want to get 200 people. 100 would be the control, which everything would have to be the same except for whatever we want to test. And the other one would get the treatment. Now, if we're going to say that Okinawan karate makes people longer, we don't tell them that we're testing Okinawan karate. We set up two physical fitness programs, and we have everything identical for the entire 200 people, except for that one factor that we're trying to find. And so what would end up happening is we would follow these people. Are they healthier? Who's healthier? Why are they healthier? Are they happier? What's going on? And then up until when they die, and then we'd be able to take the numbers and say either yes, there is a correlation, or no, there isn't. Now, the reason you would need to give two physical activities, a karate and then something else, is to make sure it's not just a physical activity that's getting people to live longer. And so that's how science works, and anyone can be a scientist. Now, as a professor, a lot of times I teach a lower division course, and I will have an assignment on the scientific method. And this is an assignment I usually tell people is we're going to use Descartes' scientific method. And for that, we have 4 steps. Now, some textbooks I've used have up to like 20 steps. That doesn't matter to me. We're going to use Descartes, the original founder, which said 4 steps. You have an observation. In the case that we're using of karate, we can see that Okinawan karateka tend to live a long time. My late instructor reached 80. His instructor was 97. His instructor's instructor was also lived in the 90s, and these martial artists were living pretty much in their 90s in a time period when most people were expecting to die by 30 or younger. Taba-sensei, one of my late teachers, he ended up being, what was it, 10 years older than what life expectancy would have been. And so we do have some changes here. But The thing that I'm actually saying is we do have these, we can see we have an observation. Now, based on that observation, we then build a hypothesis. If we're seeing a lot of martial artists living longer than other people, our hypothesis is what we're going to test. And what we would actually do is we actually reverse the question. So we say that there is no difference in the life expectancy of a martial artist and someone else. Now, we actually have to do that, and we also have to get rid of our biases. We cannot say, well, I believe this, so I'm going to find, because one of the things that happens is if you believe something and you use your beliefs to try to explain the world, you'll find evidence for what you want to find. So you actually have to take the opposite. Say there's no difference and see if there is. That's our hypothesis. We actually switch the hypothesis, which if when we test it, we have an alternative. So if we can't, if let's say we say Okinawan karate has no effects on longevity, the counter hypothesis it does. We can then say it makes people live longer. Now we're going to test and try to see if it makes no difference. If it makes a difference, then we have to accept the other one. But we have to test against it. Which is one of the problems with teaching certain things that religion wants to teach as science. You think about it, if you're actually going through the scientific method to try to prove, if you believe in a religion and you want to use it as a science, you would actually try to disprove your religion. And you would have to do that earnestly. And the problem is most people don't want to try to disprove what they believe, which is a big problem when dealing with science. You cannot try to prove something. You're trying to disprove it, and that way you have a option. So in this case, you then design a test, and those are the tests that I was telling you. You break up the groups, you do it, and you try to do stuff with as many blinding situations as possible. So ideally, if I want to test if Okinawan karate causes longevity, I would actually take two groups of 100 people. One of them would get Okinawan karate, the other one would get some other physical activity. Everything would be identical, and neither one would know who's getting a general activity and who would be getting Okinawan karate. On top of that, the person who's actually taking the notes, who's making the notes, wouldn't know which group is which. And so you're blinding both the test subjects and the observer. And it's not until after you find that there is no difference or there is a difference in the population that you can actually look at which group you're actually doing. So you'd call one group A, one group B, let's say, and you'd go through the scientific method. Now, the other sets that people give you is, so we now have an observation, a hypothesis, a test, and based on the test, we end up getting what we call a scientific theory, which is not the same thing as a theory of life or anything like that. A scientific theory has to be tested, and it had to be tested, and it had to be supported by the evidence. If it hasn't been tested, it's not a scientific theory, it's a hypothesis. Even if it's an educated hypothesis, that's all it is. So that's actually the scientific method, and that's, if you're actually looking at your martial arts, that's one of the hardest things for a lot of people to do, is to use a scientific method on their martial arts, because a lot of times we want to prove that what we know is true. And a lot of times it's hard for us to accept that, wow, I've been doing something wrong. I've been doing wrong things my whole life. I figured it out, found out that I'm doing wrong things, and so I just assume I'm wrong until someone, well, I try everything. And, if someone teaches me how to do something better, I'll try their way. If their way doesn't work, I'll go back to mine, for me. But I will always assume that there's a better way to do something. And that probably did have something to do with the way Tama-sensei did talk to me and teach me and told me, look, you have to figure out how your art works for you. He actually, one of the things he told me, and I've said this a few times, is he's actually told me one time he was going to teach me his art, his techniques, his way to do karate. But it was up to me to find my own way. And that's really one of the things that made him such a great teacher. He wasn't trying to make me his lifelong disciple. He was actually trying to make me find my own way. And that really is, I think, the thing that makes a instructor great is when he's actually trying to help you find what you really need to do. And the thing is, Taba Sensei was there's a lot of things with Taba Sensei. For instance, the first book I wrote, it really was because of him. I told him how I was looking for a book and I couldn't find it, and what he thought, and he looked at me without blinking and pretty much said, "If the book doesn't exist and you want the book, write the book you want to read." And I was like, "What a brilliant idea!" And it really is, because I found out later that there's a lot of people, and I'm talking mostly about my book, Breaking Points, which it actually has been selling quite well. And Cirrus actually sold pretty well. Apparently, a train trip where I trained in different martial arts, it sold okay, but not as good as the other two. But I'm getting off topic. So the that's actually the scientific theory. So the scientific method. So we have these three things, and the theory is constantly being retested, restructured, and as new information comes in, modifying it to make it more true. But that's one of the big things is when you understand that when someone says, "Oh, it's scientifically proven," it means these guys are trying to sell you a bunch of horse crap, and that's it. Now, part of the reason why this came about is there's apparently a state that is able to train police in 1 month how to determine how if someone's on certain types of drugs. And what's really amazing is I studied medicine. I actually did do some stuff in when I was studying in drug, alcohol, and treatments. And in 1 month, it wasn't enough to understand the basics of something like alcohol or the not just the basics of alcohol, but also the differential diagnosis for alcohol. Yes, you can say, "Oh, this person's intoxicated," but that's as far as you can say. And you can only say it if it's at a certain range where it's obvious. If it's at is this person intoxicated or not, you can't do it clinically. You need tests. And this one of the states, I think it was Georgia, uh, it's using tests which are just signs to determine stuff which the tests that they have are not sensitive enough for. And the truth is, nobody would use if a test exists, and people say, "Well, we don't know if he has it or not because this test is not sensitive enough." Usually, they say he doesn't have it until he gets to a certain spot. So, they're saying that these cops can actually determine drug use better than blood and urine tests. And to me, that's a ridiculous claim. I mean, and anyone who studied basic human body, basic physiology would know that that's pretty much a lie. And so one of the things is I can't remember what state's doing this, but hopefully some lawyer will actually see something like this and maybe help them do a class action suit to get things to be a little more rational. But so I guess I kind of did a bit of ramble of everything. I don't know if this is going to be too interesting. But what I did want to show you is a lot of times in a knife fight, in knives, people will actually have the knife here, and they'll say, "Oh, you're getting cut here." Now, I actually took a knife, which is a knife that's supposed to be a high quality knife. It's Chicago cutlery, and I took a rib, as I would do here, and I tried to cut it along here. What I noticed is it would rarely be able to cut deep enough into the muscle. It wouldn't get into the uh, bone, and if that were a human hand, the arteries you have one here, which if you want to check it, don't use your thumb, use your index and pointer finger, go right by your thumb and press. Now, you're going to have to press relatively deep, you're going to have to get relatively deep because you're actually trying to get an artery. It's not superficial. It's not just touching here, you have to push. And that's where you'll feel the artery. You also have one on the ulnar side here. Now these things are deep. You have to go through skin and a little bit of muscle and some connective tissue. And so the scraping the knife across the skin like this, first of all, it may cut the skin, but it's only going to be superficial cut. Is that going to be enough to do any real damage? The answer is no. It's just, unless you have some sort of bloodborne disease on the knife, it's not going to be able to do enough to cause any problems. And so That's one of the things I did see. You have to go relatively, if you actually feel your pulse, you'll notice here in the carotid artery, it's not right here. It's not like in movies where it's like you get a little cut here and, oh, that's it. Feel. Feel the beating. That's the artery. You'll notice that you have to go deep. You have to push into the artery. And yes, there's a spot there which is a little softer, but you have to go through connective tissue. So these little things where you're just touching and that's not realistic. That said, there are some knives that are specialized for cutting. I saw one where it actually is hooked, so when it hits, it takes chunks out of people. But for the most part, those knives aren't really sold or carried. And I think someone was telling me that a lot of those knives are illegal to carry. You can have them in your home, your shop, but you can't carry them outside. So, depending on what state you're in, I guess things change. So you do have certain things that are actually made to cut, which may be a little different, but your typical knives are not going to be cutting. If you rub it against the side here, even if you put the blade in and try to cut, it's not going to cut. If you don't believe me, take a butter knife, take the sharpest knife you have, put it next to a piece of meat, and try to cut the meat just by doing this. You'll notice that you may get little cuts, but it's not going to be deep enough for anything. Now, I hope you enjoyed this video and my rambling. There are other videos that I want to do, which I haven't gotten around to. There was one video I wanted to do, which I realized I can't do because I have to buy an entire pork rib, and usually I'd have to special order it because most of the people will actually break the ribs into baby back ribs or the what do they call it, St. Louis cut, and so it makes it a difficult way to get a whole pork rib, which is what I would use. The other thing is pork ribs, I was looking at it, are about 3 times as thick as a human rib, and so makes it also harder to break. Wouldn't be as realistic. Well, here I'm going to show you in the kitchen how I use the knife to work on a rib, to show you that just moving it around like this isn't necessarily going to get you a cut, other than like a superficial cut, as if you would get cut when you were shaving. So hope you enjoy this and have a nice day. Hello, it's Rafael Gutierrez, and today I'm in my kitchen and I bought ribs, and so I wanted to do a couple experiments on them. I actually got St. Louis style, which are a lot bigger than the human ribs, so they wouldn't work for that. But I actually wanted to show something, which I figured one rib would be enough to show on. And that's this. A lot of times people do knife defense and they start doing things like this. Now, is this cutting the meat? Now, some people would say, well, maybe it's just not a sharp knife. So what I did is, I will use my cutting board here, same knife, same piece of meat here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how sharp it really is. And what you'll notice is I can actually cut all the way almost to the bone with this. What I'm telling you is, while this little strike here may actually cut a little bit, it's not the same as if I come here and pull across a bone here. Here, we actually get a cut that gets into the bone. Now, the reason I'm actually showing this is some people will actually show, okay, if someone grabs you here, you just twist the knife here. And what it's going to do to me, if I just twist the knife here, if I'm holding up, it's going to be superficial cuts, but it's not going to make the cut that's going to actually penetrate bone or penetrate a lot of muscle, like here, which you need a slice for. And so a lot of times these little cuts here, yes, while it will cut the skin, it doesn't have the strength to go into arteries. And so having a bone, having things I can show, I figured I'd show that. I'm hoping next week to be able to find baby back ribs, and so I'll be able to do some of the ribs there. Thank you, and have a good day.